Good morning. My name is Cynthia Norse Thompson, and I am the Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Zuckerman Museum of Art. Thank you for joining us this morning to hear artist Tricia Wright talk about her exhibition, The Naturalist, on view through December 5th, and hear her talk about her artistic practice. Tricia Wright is originally from England and educated in London. She moved permanently to the United States in 1999. Wright operates a full-time art practice in North Stamford, Connecticut, and maintains close connections with Europe. She was raised in an Irish-English home and divides her time between her studio in Connecticut and her home in West Cork, Ireland, where she lives several months each year. Her works are held in museum, corporate, and private collections in the United States, the UK, Europe, and Africa. Recent achievements include her 2024 solo exhibition, The Naturalist, which was also on view at the Arkansas Museum of Fine Art, and now on view at the Zuckerman Museum of Art through December 5th. In 2019, she was awarded a public art commission from the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority, a large-scale permanent installation in glass and metal at Crestwood Railway Station. In 2019, she was also awarded a workspace artist residency at the renowned hand papermaking studio, Dudonné, located in Brooklyn, New York. Wright has also been an artist in residence at the Vermont Studio Center and was awarded a Pollock Krasner grant. Please join me in welcoming artist Tricia Wright.
Hello, I'm Tricia Wright, and this is a talk about my exhibition, The Naturalist, about the ideas behind the work and the different processes and materials involved. There are 3 groups of work in the show, all very different in appearance and in how they are made, but they are all heavily textured and dimensional, and they are also conceptually layered, so there's quite a lot to unpack. This work comes from a very personal place, so I'll give you context for that too, and tell you a little about my background and the circumstances that shape the artworks. The first group of work I want to talk about is Bogland Variations. This series and the other handmade paperworks in the show were produced in collaboration with Dudonné at their dedicated papermaking studios in Brooklyn. I initially developed this body of work during my residency there in 2018, but only fully realised the series in 2023. There are 12 variations in all, 7 of them are in the exhibition. This is Bogland Variation number 1. I'll scroll through other examples as I speak, and sometimes I repeat an image for clarity. The Bogland Variations were directly inspired by a poem called Bogland, which was written by the Irish poet Seamus Heaney in 1969. Peat bogs are acidic, anaerobic environments with the ability to preserve organic matter over astounding periods of time. Unlike archaeological digs that typically uncover hard materials like metal, pottery and bone, bog environments also preserved soft organic materials like human tissue, leather and hair, as well as clothing and even the partially digested contents of a stomach. This is an image of the Tolland man, whose body was found naturally preserved in a bog in Denmark. He lived an astonishing 2,400 years ago. Heaney wrote about the Tolland man and other bog bodies that were excavated in the north and western parts of Europe, but his poem Bogland approaches the subject from a specifically Irish context, and it's that perspective that informs my own work. So I'm just going to show you a couple of images of Irish boglands so you have a frame of reference. This is actually a photograph of my family's land in the rural west of Ireland. I have very early memories of being in this place, and it's precisely this kind of landscape Heaney describes in his poem. Here's a close view of a bog, showing the deep cutaway in the foreground where the men have been harvesting the peat for fuel. Dense peat would be stripped away layer by layer in brick-sized pieces, the bottom of the bog hole getting increasingly wet as the layers are cut away. Bog earth, or peat turf as it's known, has been used as fuel in Ireland for centuries. It's like coal in a sense, but less compressed and closer to the surface, halfway to becoming fossil fuel. So now you have some context. Here is Heaney's poem, which inspired my series, and I'll read it aloud. Bogland. We have no prairies to slice a big sun at evening. Everywhere the eye concedes to encroaching horizon is wooed into the cyclops eye of a tarn. Our unfenced country is bog that keeps crusting between the sights of the sun. They've taken the skeleton of the great Irish elk out of the peat, set it up, an astounding crate full of air. Butter, sunk under more than 100 years, was recovered salty and white. The ground itself is kind black butter, melting and opening underfoot, missing its last definition by millions of years. They'll never dig coal here. Only the waterlogged trunks of great firs, soft as pulp. Our pioneers keep striking inwards and downwards. Every layer they strip seems camped on before. The bog holes might be Atlantic seepage. The wet centre is bottomless. So in his poem, Heaney reflects on the bog as a kind of living reliquary, as he describes stripping away the layers of the bog and uncovering traces of previous existences. The remains of an animal now extinct in Ireland, for example, or evidence of ordinary domestic lives in the form of preserved butter. He writes, "Every layer they strip seems camped on before." Heaney emphasises the connection between history and a palpable sense of place through the visceral connection to the earth itself. And this visceral aspect of the poem spoke to the physical connection to Ireland I have through the body of my mother, and she through hers, and so on, going back further and deeper in time, like stripping away the layers of the bog. So in these works, I merge materials of the bog with textures of the human body, manipulating the pulp by hand to evoke wrinkles and folds of skin, and also to evoke the textures of the preserved bog bodies. To create these skin-like textures, I developed a process of manipulating layers of pulp while it was still wet and very fragile. Handling the pulp in this state is difficult. It has no elasticity at all and falls apart at the slightest touch. So I worked with multiple layers of pulp, 4 base layers of cotton to give it body, and 4 top layers of abaca, which dries to a strong, smooth surface. Before my residency at Dieudonné, I had no experience of paper making, or even print making really, for that matter. My practice was primarily painting based. Handling this unfamiliar material was a new departure for me and led me to approach my subjects in a non-descriptive way, working through the material as opposed to thinking of paper as a surface for image. My bogland variations draw on the earthy physicality of Heaney's poem, on his descriptions of water-logged trunks of great firs soft as pulp, and butter sunk under more than 100 years. The batches of abaca and cotton pulps I used to make these works were pigmented the colours of wood, black earth and butter. I crushed dried peat turf bricks and layered this material into the pulp, and I also embedded it in the surface of the paper. These works also incorporate other organic materials like moss, fungi, tree bark and lichen. The poem opens with the words, "We have no prairies," a negative assertion that immediately calls to mind the American prairie, which Heaney experienced firsthand when he was teaching at Yale for a period. Later in the poem he writes, "Our pioneers keep striking inwards and downwards." So right off the bat he contrasts the expansiveness of the American landscape with its pioneering outward bound history with the tendency in Ireland to look inwards and to the past. The poem ends with a reference to the Atlantic Ocean that physically connects Ireland to America. As a transplant to the US, all of these associations resonated with me on a very personal level. The poem describes two landscapes that I am intimately familiar with, the American and the Irish, and the tensions he sets up between these two worlds, both physically and psychologically, reflect the push and pull of my own life. My family connection to Ireland plays a central role in this work. My mother was Irish. She moved to England as a young woman, married there and raised a family. So although I grew up in England, Ireland loomed very large in my childhood, through a strong identification with my mother and also through my own formative experiences. I grew up in a community dominated by Irish immigrants and their offspring. I went to a convent grammar school made up of probably 90% Irish descendants. I was also raised to think of Ireland as a homeland, so all of this made for a conflicted kind of identity, which I then complicated further by emigrating to the US in 1999, weirdly mirroring my mother's own early experience. She returned to Ireland late in life, and after she passed away, I bought a cottage close to where she grew up, and I now live there for part of the year, in a sense completing the circle. For me, the phrase "we have no prairies" has become synonymous with our ties to the past, that wherever we go, the past continues to shape our consciousness, both on a personal level and politically. So I present these works in the manner of open books, which for centuries have provided a way for us to intellectually access the past, and which contain narratives and histories that continue to impact how we think about ourselves. These books are composed of the raw materials of the bog itself and hinged with steel. The words "we have no prairies" is a unifying element in the bogland variations, debossed into the soft body of the pulp. Here you can see me positioning 3D printed letters on a sheet of very wet pulp. The pulp is also layered and embedded with crushed peat turf. The work in this state would then be pressed to remove excess water and dried under weights, with the physical letters still in place. The letters are removed after the work is dry, leaving their imprint behind like a pattern stamped in butter or words cut in stone. After my residency at Dieudonné, I was invited to produce an edition for their paper variables program. But then COVID happened and everything was on hold. For many people, the disruption of COVID was also a chance to pause and take stock of their lives. This was certainly the case for me, and my experience during COVID was intense. In early March 2020, I went to Ireland, ostensibly for just 10 days, staying in the little cottage we had just bought. At that stage, COVID hadn't really taken off, and there was little indication of what was coming. Things escalated really quickly though, and towards the end of this trip, I got an urgent call from my husband at 3 a.m. telling me to come home now, or I might not be allowed back into the country. People with a history of respiratory illness were cautioned not to fly, so I decided to stay. In the end, I was in Ireland for 7 months, living in a cottage with barely any furniture, no art materials, and no means of transport. My husband joined me eventually, but for more than half of that time I was completely alone. Lockdown in Ireland was very strict, forbidding travel for any reason beyond 2 kilometres. So I walked in loops, up the same little lanes every day, through the woods, along the water, over and over in all weathers. Days would go by without contact with another human being. This was in many ways a wonderful experience, but the longer it went on, the more disconnected I felt to issues that had driven my practice for years. And I realised this path had come to an abrupt end. The solitude and intensity of my time in Ireland redirected my thinking away from big cultural ideas towards content that was more local and personal. Being so far away from my US life and cut off from its distractions and concerns, I was able to revive the connection to nature I enjoyed as a child and rediscovered a buried version of myself. Being so thoroughly immersed in the natural world and significantly in my place of heritage, my whole focus shifted. And this brings me to the beautiful field. The beautiful field has become for me shorthand for a moment of clarity. My week spent walking in loops created in me a persistent feeling that meaning resided in the nature around me, but that it was hidden in some way. I encountered the beautiful field one day on one of my walks. There was nothing grand or inspiring about it, just an empty field of grass. But it stopped me in my tracks, spellbound by the breeze rippling the grass and the sparkling acoustics of the birds' song. The beautiful field represented for me both a solution and a problem, in that it showed me what I wanted to make art about, but not how to go about doing it. Because I had no materials, I would write down what I saw and felt and thought about on these walks. It was 2 years before I was able to get back into the studio properly and start working on the edition for Dieudonné. This is when my lockdown experience in Ireland really came to the surface. In preparing for that work, I thought about the beautiful field, now in hindsight. I reread my notes, and I also thought about poetry. I'll talk more about poetry later, but it plays a prominent role in the works in this exhibition. The edition I finally produced for Dieudonné is called Rapture, comprising 12 works in handmade paper, divided into 4 suites and pigmented in 4 different colours. Each suite is made up of 3 related motifs, just as you see here. All the works in the edition, in one way or another, come out of my experience in Ireland. They explore my relationship to nature and reflect on the element of time and the value of human touch. Each composition is structured on a simple dialogue between a central motif and an encircling halo. Some halos are composed of insects, others have traditional geometry, but they all share the same function of highlighting, glorifying and elevating. This piece is from the suite called Small Matters, which expresses my fascination with small, often overlooked creatures. The hand in these works is my own, celebrating my own personal connection to nature and the possibility of physical intimacy with the natural world. The second suite in the edition contains text elements and reflects on the element of time and on being. The title of this suite is Time and the Bell, a reference to T.S. Eliot's long poem 4 Quartets, which explores the element of time in great depth and complexity. I have been reading Eliot for many years, and he crops up a lot in my work. Here I Am, from this suite, quietly acknowledges that I am most myself when I am in nature. The odd placement of the comma shifts the reading from a geographical location to a state of being. The central placement of the words implies a human relationship to the encircling insects, which are small, inconsequential and short-lived. The words assert my place within this order, subject to the same natural laws of time and mutability. The paradox inherent in the words now or now refers to the challenge of quieting the mind during meditation, when one's awareness of time passing millisecond by millisecond makes the possibility of just being more elusive. Now or now can also refer to time on a big scale. The words encircled by short-lived mayflies can be read with urgency as an environmental imperative, a call to action. The embossed words and ellipses in this piece are from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, T.S. Eliot's long rumination on time wasted. In its original form, the phrase I grow old repeats. I've omitted the last word, countering the poem's existential dread and fear of wasted life with a hopeful association between ageing and personal growth. These works are embossed, So the text and the raised forms are pushed out from behind the paper, as opposed to in the Bogland variations where the text was debossed into the surface of the work. Embossing makes for a quieter statement and a gentle, more homogeneous surface. These embossed pieces start out as line drawings on mylar. Each individual element in a composition is converted into a 3D form using a tabletop 3D printer. I attach the 3D forms to a flexible backing, then a sheet of wet pulp is laid over the top of that and the whole thing goes into a press to squeeze out the water and push the pulp around the forms. The work is then loaded into a drying rack under heavy weights for a week, and when the paper is dry I work on it again by hand to increase definition of the embossed areas, finally gilding those raised areas with gold leaf in hues ranging from 12 to 23 carats. The third suite is called apotheosis, which is an ancient religious term for the process of elevating an entity from the ordinary to the exalted. I had a fairly unexceptional Catholic upbringing and education, and religion does not play a part in my life today. But the language and iconography of my background are deeply ingrained in me, and to unlearn them would be like trying to unlearn one's mother tongue. So I embraced this imagery and language on my own terms, divorced from their doctrinal context and employed instead in the service of the natural world. These works celebrate the extraordinariness of living things, microscopic organisms, snails, and the complex, unfathomable octopus. Miraculous in themselves, here they comfortably inhabit the exalted space of a halo. The last suite in the edition is Memento, which honours small, everyday interactions with the physical world and celebrates the element of touch in a culture steeped in virtual experience. In formalised gestures, 3 objects, a potato peeler, a flower and an awl, are held aloft as things of consequence, dignifying the small tasks and experiences they represent. So the ideas explored in the Rapture edition are expanded on a larger scale in the Naturalist diptych. Here, living things surround central motifs again, but they present a more complex ecosystem governed by its own rhythms and cycles. This diptych was also more complex and technically demanding to produce. Each panel is 30 by 40 inches, and working at this scale in handmade paper is challenging. I made a short production video for this work that covers the progress of the left-hand panel from raw pulp state to finished piece. So before I talk about the themes in the work, I'm going to play the video and talk you through the steps. So here's a bucket of pulp that has been pigmented, ready to form a sheet. The pulp is poured into the decal box and kept moving so that it's evenly dispersed, and the plastic liner is removed, allowing the water to drain away, and the decal is quickly levelled to ensure the pulp forms an evenly balanced sheet. The frame of the decal is removed next, and the raw sheet of pulp laid down onto a surface with pressure applied evenly to the back of the decal to make sure that the sheet bonds properly to the surface below and the decal can come away cleanly. The sheet of pulp is then covered with layers of Pellon fabric, blankets, metal sheets, wooden board. The whole thing is extremely heavy, and then the whole thing goes into the press. At this point, the 3D forms used to emboss the paper have already been positioned under the pulp, but you can't see that here because my hands were tied up in that process. The sheet is pressed 3 times, each time with increasing pressure. The first press removes excess water. The second and third presses increase definition. And here is the reveal after the final press, and you can see how the pulp is fully contoured around the 3D forms. The final part of the process happens back in my own studio. Here I'm working on the reverse of the paper. Some definition is inevitably lost during the drying process as the material shrinks away from the 3D forms underneath. So I use a variety of tools to sharpen the definition of the shapes, smooth out ridges, and maximize the depth of the embossed areas by hand. Then I turn the paper over and work on the face of the piece. Again, sharpening contours, defining forms and details before preparing the raised areas for gilding. I apply 2 coats of gilding size to each raised form. Then, using a squirrel hair brush, pick up individual sheets of gold leaf. In this case, it's 12 karat gold, which has a kind of silver hue, and lay them over the sized areas. And the last step is to remove excess leaf with the soft brush. As I said earlier, the intensity of my experience in Ireland during COVID reconnected me with part of myself that had been buried and almost forgotten over the course and drama of my life. The Naturalist diptych is a conscious reclaiming of that self. The title makes reference to another Seamus Heaney poem, Death of a Naturalist, which he wrote in 1966. It's a deeply sad poem, as the title implies, about the relationship between people and the natural world and the fraught transition between childhood and adulthood. It has a 2-stanza before and after structure. The first stanza describes a child's wonder and acceptance of nature, and that's starkly contrasted in the second stanza when this wonder has turned to revulsion. Reading the poem for the first time, I felt a shock of recognition and also a kind of grief for that lost world. My childhood had been really quite solitary. I spent much of my time alone, exploring rivers and woods with complete freedom. My work then is called simply The Naturalist, and it's inspired by the first stanza alone. The right panel of the diptych offers an intellectual counterpart to the physicality suggested by the bare feet in the left panel. It contains a list of adjectives taken from Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem Pied Beauty, which was written in 1877, also 2 stanzas long. Hopkins was a relatively obscure Victorian poet whose slim volume of poetry was published in 1918, nearly 30 years after his death. His strange and highly individual innovations made him a forerunner of modernist poetry, and his idiosyncratic use of language was a foundational influence on Seamus Heaney. Hopkins was an innovator of form and structure, but he articulates a Victorian mode of expression that doesn't sit very comfortably to contemporary ears. It's a very short poem, as you can see. I'll read it now so you can hear the language in its original form and also see how I adapted it in my own work. So, Pied Beauty. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple colour as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire cold chestnut falls, finches' wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow and plough, and all trades their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how. With swift, slow, sweet, sour, adazzle, dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change, praise him. So you can hear just how rhapsodic the language is, and how to Hopkins, nature is synonymous with religious fervour. I have isolated his beautiful descriptive elements in the second stanza and presented them as a simple list of adjectives and left it at that. No religious context, no secondary value system, just an invitation to think about the variety and beauty of the natural world. Presented in this way, in conjunction with the left panel, the words unite idea with experience, mind with body. The third and final group of work in the exhibition is my current series, By Sea, by Land. This body of work explores the theme of migration, both in the political context and from a personal perspective. It introduces the theme of human migration to the naturalist exhibition, situating the human impulse to migrate within the domain of the animal kingdom, and as such connected to free movement around the globe by sea, by land and by air. These works are inspired by medieval reliquaries, devotional objects imbued with the power to guide and protect. Here is a medieval reliquary type object, embellished with metal filigree and precious stones. This is one of many artefacts of its kind at the Cluny Museum of Medieval Art in Paris, where I did the bulk of my research for this work. For centuries, humans have projected their deepest fears and hopes onto such talismanic or devotional objects. In my work, these objects are represented by contemporary flotation devices and other everyday objects associated with global migration and the perilous journeys made by people compelled to leave their homeland. By sea, one takes the form of a life ring, heavily embellished with gold threads and wires, emulating the metal filigree used to decorate medieval reliquaries. The rope of the life ring is made from metal coils sewn over cotton padding, which gives it dimension. In place of the precious gemstones typically used to embellish devotional objects, I have used ordinary stones and pebbles collected from my garden and from beaches in Ireland. By C1 also contains text elements at the centre, not immediately visible at first glance. So here's a close-up view of the text. These are words from another Irish poet, W.B. Yeats, from the first line of his romantic poem, The Lake Isle of Innisfree. Yeats's poem expresses nostalgic longing for an imagined sanctuary in nature. I've contrasted this with the mundanity of a life ring and the harsh realities of the asylum seeker forced to go, for whatever reason, into the unknown. The words are painted over a medium intended for raised gilding, so they stand out from the linen ground, but the colour is muted to give them a quiet, reflective quality. This is not a shout. Poetry has long been a kind of companion guide for me and plays a significant role in my practice. It was especially helpful in showing me ways to tackle my problem with the beautiful field, for example, in thinking about how to address the gap between visible and invisible worlds and communicate ideas in a non-literal way. Visual artworks like mine are static, singular objects. Other disciplines like film, literature and music, say, have the luxury of time to develop character, unfold plot, expand a leitmotif, for example. But here you see everything all at once. So you have to find strategies for holding the viewer's attention and also provide a space for the viewer's own imagination. What I love about poetry is how it communicates complex, expanding ideas, often in remarkably short, concise ways, making leaps of time and space just through the use of unexpected juxtaposition. Yeats is an absolute master of this. He's an inspirational figure for me. This is by C2. Again, I'm referencing the methods and materials of medieval reliquaries to present a contemporary flotation vest as a precious object. These works are relatively small, in keeping with the intimate scale of such devotional objects. They're all 24 by 24 inches and made on fine-grade linen. The background areas are built up in layers of transparent glazes to evoke the grey light of dawn or of dusk. Other areas, like the buckles and straps in this piece for instance, are raw, unglazed linen surrounded by gold and jewel-like embellishments. The gold background around the forms is shell gold, which I produce in my studio. Shell gold is another medieval process in which sheets of gold leaf are slowly dissolved in gum arabic to produce a tiny amount of water-soluble gold paint. It's called shell gold because historically the paint was mixed and stored inside seashells. Enclosed within the life jacket, as though for safekeeping, is a raised gold heart. The dimensional form was achieved by sewing gilded kid leather over layers of felt padding. And here's a deconstruction of that process. On the left is a drawing of the layers needed to build up the three-dimensional structure. In the centre you can see the layers of felt sewn on in decreasing size, and then the layer of felt, the final layer enclosing all of the smaller forms. The gilded leather was then sewn over the top of this. After developing an extended body of work in dimensional paper at Dieudonné, I wanted to continue exploring low relief forms independently and in other materials. So these works mark a new departure in my practice, enabling me to achieve the kind of dimensional surface I want in new materials and in an entirely new technical process. This process is called gold work. It's a very old embroidery technique dating back to the Middle Ages that enabled artists to create dimensional designs over textiles. The materials consist of metal threads, coils and wires that are sewn onto the surface as opposed to through the material as you would do with regular sewing thread. Goldwork embroidery can be seen today on ecclesiastical vestments and certain kinds of ceremonial garb, but it's a rare process that is dying out. The third piece in this group, and the last I'm going to talk about, is called By Land. Here I've taken an old and worn sneaker and elevated it to the status of a devotional object. This work is inspired by reports of detritus regularly picked up in the desert on the Mexican side of the US border wall. These abandoned or lost objects typically include empty water bottles, children's backpacks, clothes, and often single shoes. The scale of the shoe here is intentionally ambiguous. With its Velcro opening and pretend laces, it's a cheaply produced shoe that would be worn by a young adult or maybe an older child. This kind of human migration is slow and arduous. The circle of natural organisms is intended to suggest a kind of movement and the slow rotation of circadian rhythms. Earthbound snails progress slowly across the ground, wandering and directionless. Airborne seeds drift weightlessly and equally without agency. I've used gilded kid leather here again on the shoe, sewn over felt padding, and the snails are made by sewing silk threads over cotton padding. So this brings me to the end of my talk. This body of work I have shared with you today brings together ideas about history, identity, and nature from the perspective of my own lived experience. The works on migration, at their core, reflect on the internal toll immigration can take on a person's sense of belonging and the long-term generational impact on identity. The exhibition as a whole explores themes of connectedness to the land and to history and to the wider natural world. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy the exhibition.